class, this is part 1 of your week 5 lecture. I'm splitting this into 2 shorter sections so that if you want to just watch them in short segments, you can. They don't necessarily have to relate to each other, so they will, put together, they will not be more than an hour, I promise you. But right now what we're going to talk about is the elements of society that is economy and trade. And we need to talk about this one early on because it gives us the vocabulary for how to describe a lot of the societies that we're talking about. Some of this vocab you know things like hunter-gatherer, but let's get a little more into depth with what these different terms mean. Okay. Nope. There we go. Okay. So the first term we need to be able to define is nomadic, which means that there is no fixed home that the group goes back to. That is moving from place to place, usually according to season or survival concerns. Nomadic peoples are frequently hunter-gatherer. That's why I'm putting them on the same page, but they are not necessarily hunter-gatherer. It's just more typical. In a hunter-gatherer society, subsistence is achieved through hunting of wild animals and gathering wild plants. I have examples of different ethnic groups on each of these slides that you aren't required to know. I just have them on there as examples of these particular terms that we're learning. And on this one, I have a picture of the Kalahari Bushmen. They are nomadic hunter-gatherers on the continent of Africa, and part of their territory that they occupy is in Tanzania. They have had to actually sue international governments in order to preserve their way of life. Or wait, I said Tanzania, now I think it's Uganda. I will check on that actually, because I think I just I may have mixed it up. It's definitely East Africa. But they used to travel freely across this land, across East Africa, and of course with stricter borders, border controls, stricter territorial rules and laws, they are not able to just roam and hunt wherever they please. This is of course seen as a way of infringing on their way of life, of how they achieve subsistence, how their economy and their trade works. And so they have actually sued governments in order to preserve their customs, their tradition, and their way of life, because they want to remain nomadic hunter-gatherers. They do not want to become our next category, which would be semi-nomadic and pastoral. So semi-nomadic is exactly what it sounds like. Living in temporary or easily transported dwellings from place to place. Again, it would be according to season. The difference is there's a fixed home base where there might be some very small gardens cultivated, just very small patches of ground. And it's a place that the group is consistently coming back to at a particular season. So there is a lot of traveling. There is usually a lot of hunting and gathering around, but there's also a lot of checking back into this one place. And my battery's low. I just clearly prepped really well for this. The pastoral economy is an economy that is based on husbandry of domesticated, not wild livestock. Now that's important because the hunter-gatherers, of course, hunt and eat wild animals, but this is domesticated animals, okay? So that is the transition of pastoral to just going out into the jungle like the Hunikui to having, such as the Mbongu have, their pigs that are a sign of wealth, a form of currency, and also used for subsistence. These are, so they are partly pastoral. A great example of a pastoral tribe is the Turkana, which is a semi-nomadic tribe of pastoralists in sub-Saharan Africa. They also occupy part of Kenya and have had similar issues with not being able to continue to be pastoralists, mostly because of an intense drought that has happened in that part of the world. And the government and other agencies are pushing them to become agrarian, agriculturalists, but by tradition, they are pastoralists. That defines their identity. That defines who they are as Turkana. So they have no desire to move to a different form of economy and trade because their identity is so closely linked with this particular form. Another form of pastoralists are nomadic pastoralists. So they would be nomadic with domesticated livestock that are herded from place to place with the tribe's seasonal movements. A lot of times these movements are now dictated by the grazing lands for their animals. The Tsatans herd reindeer through the steppes of Mongolia. They are, non-ironically, called the reindeer people, and their whole lifestyle, form of subsistence, is derived from the cultivation of these domestic herds of reindeer. So they drink the milk, they wear the fur and the pelts, they ride them. Clearly by this photo you can see they are a form of transportation, so they're used in a way that we would think of using horses even. They're a beast of burden, and when they die, more often through natural causes than through slaughter, because they are highly valued, then they are eaten as well. So what happens with each of these economies is you will see that they find a way to survive. They find a means of subsistence. And then they find, after you've reached subsistence, after you're surviving, you find something to trade. You find something that you can make in excess and then exchange with other people groups who have something else that you want or need. And what happens along this way is you get to an agrarian, you progress to an agrarian type of society. Each of these societies is a little more complex than the last. So in the agrarian economy, everything is based on the crops and domesticated livestock. So transitioning from being just pastoralist to being agrarian as well, the people don't change location. They're, of course, fairly sedentary. And the most valuable thing in this economy is land. So with the pastoralists, of course, most valuable thing, the thing that drives the economy, animals. How about hunter-gatherers? Well, then it would be like physical strength and hunting aptitude and things like that. Those are the most valuable currencies. Well, now when we're talking about agrarian society, the most valuable thing is land. Once we get to an agrarian society, we enter a whole new level of complexity. The reason, and just, you can logically follow this. Think about what happens when you section off a plot of land and you say, this is mine, okay? It's that whole concept of mine and yours. You don't have that with nomadic and semi-nomadic societies. There's this land. It doesn't necessarily belong to anyone. It's just there for survival. Everyone uses it. There may be just slightly disputed hunting territories. Some tribes encroach into each other's turf, but there's definitely no concept of individual ownership of that land. You didn't see anyone in the Huni Kui saying, this patch of the jungle is mine. That concept doesn't exist. So with this concept of ownership, of the proprietary nature of land from which you derive your income and your subsistence, comes the need for additional laws. Comes the need for a more formalized political structure in society. And that's pretty basic. Think about, you have to know where your border is, and somebody has to arbitrate where that border is. And when your cow goes over and eats the other guy's wheat, what do you do about that? What are the consequences of that? Because you've just taken some of the most valuable resources. So this is the point where we start seeing societies become more stratified. We see more elaborate power structures put into place, a lot more laws about what you can and can't do. And it's because of the nature of having a concept of ownership. This picture here is of rice paddies in India. A lot of South Asia have these rice paddies. Despite how industrialized India has become, still most of India's economy is agricultural. And of course rice is a major crop. Fairly easy to grow and not too expensive. Now, after you've become an agrarian society, the next progression, after you've gotten all these crops and you start trading with each other and producing more than you need just to eat and live, then you start either getting currency or you start getting other goods that you can use to make even more elaborate wealth schemes. That brings us to industrial societies. So industrialization is driven by the use of technology for mass production. So we've already got a higher level of production moving from these tiny little plots of lands with semi-nomadic to an agrarian where we have big farms. Well, now we can mass produce food, things, everything has a very high capacity for the division of labor. So you don't have to hunt and gather and cultivate a little garden and do all the things and build your shelter. You just do the one thing that you specifically are good at. You saw wood. And that is the only thing that you particularly do. And in this industry, manufacturing is the source of wealth. So land is not as valuable, although that still clearly plays a role because you have to have a place for the factory. But it's the actual production of things that manufactures, for lack of a better term, wealth in the society. Now, of course, we know about the Industrial Revolution that took place in the early 19th century. North America and to some extent Great Britain led the way in the Industrial Revolution. In the 21st century, most regions of the world are industrialized to some extent. What you have more typically is something like India, where there will be industrial centers, major cities that have industrialized, and then a lot of the outlying areas are still agricultural. But there are few countries left in the world that don't have some degree of industrialization within them. Now, after industrialization, which is where we are now, you have post-industrial. We have a post-industrial society here in North America. This is where information and knowledge become the most valuable commodities. And the service sector is actually more profitable than manufacturing. We see this here. We see so many people are employed some way by the service sector, in hospitality, those kinds of things, or in high-level, more intellectual jobs, for if you want to term it that way. Very few people are employed in the majority of the United States in the actual making of things, in the manufacturing sector. What happens? A lot of that manufacturing goes to other countries because labor is cheaper in other places. Here, knowledge is actually the most valuable currency that you can have. Think about the hierarchy at a factory. You have the people who are actually making the things, doing the thing right, who are paid at a certain job level, but who actually makes the most profit from that? It's not those people actually making the physical thing. It's the people who know how to run a business. It's the people who know supply chains. It's the people who know how to barter, or what the laws are, what the tariffs are, how to transport the goods. These are people who have knowledge of the inner workings of business and commerce, and they're the ones who actually make the most money in this type of society. So most of what we commonly term first world or Western society is currently a post-industrial society. This particular photo comes from Berlin, and it is this is where we're at. And the question then becomes, the question for you to contemplate is, what is after this? What is the most valuable thing in a post-industrial society? Nobody has ever been beyond this. As I indicated, there's this natural progression from the simple society to the complex society, and by that I do not in any way, shape, or form mean civilized or uncivilized. What I mean is there more political structure, more laws, and is there a higher level of excess in manufacturing to where you can sell goods rather than just using them for your own subsistence. So that's been our progression up to this point, is pushing towards this post-industrial place. Now the question is, where do we go beyond here? Because we are so disconnected at this point from even where our food comes from in a post-industrial society. I think that's one of the things that concerns and if you're a typical college student age, your generation, is that we want to be assured of fair supply chains. We want to know that our food is good, that it is healthy for us, that it was ethically produced. And there is more of a shift towards being closer to the production of your food than has existed for a couple hundred years. So that's an interesting move away from post-industrialization, away from this idea of we have knowledge, but someone else does the actual making of the thing and the growing of the food. Now there's more of an idea that we need to be making our own things, growing our own foods, which begs the question: what does that need a more complex society, or is this actually a return to a simpler society just with more technological capacity? And we don't know is the thing. We're not there yet. But one of the things that is taking place, of course, is the 3D printer, which is now becoming very affordable. And there may come a time where you can literally manufacture what you want on your desktop. Like, you are needing a specific screw, and you don't go to the hardware store to find the screw that someone made in a factory somewhere far from here. You just put specific patterns into your 3D printer and you print the size and shape screw that you need to, fix whatever object or hang your picture or whatever it is you're doing. So this is a very interesting place to be in, and one that we really just don't know what comes after this. But I encourage you to ponder that and think about, as you get to be in your 70s and 80s, as you get much older and are moving to a post-industrial society, what might the world look like then? Okay, so learn these terms, and I will go on to making part 2 of your week 5 lecture.